Chapter 20. Is there another way out of here? As he spoke, Bones scanned the tiny office. No windows, no door other than that which led back into the museum. Kruger shook his head. Do you think it's the Dominion? I don't know. The Dominion, a powerful extremist group with ties in business and government, had dogged Bones and Maddox's trail for years, and Kruger had found himself caught up in it. I know they're pretty much broken in the U.S., but that doesn't mean they're gone. All I know is someone's been after us ever since Xxii and I started researching the incident at Alcone Rock. Kruger blinked. I could tell you a little something about that, too, provided you can get us out of here. He moved to the door and peered out. 2 guys are coming this way. What do we do? Bones took another look around. His eyes wandered to the drop ceiling. What's on the other side of this wall? A storage room. Why? Kruger looked up. His focus sharpened, and he nodded. Good idea. I'll see what I can do to slow them down. While Kruger locked the door and wrestled a heavy filing cabinet in front of it, Bones sprang into action. He leaped up onto Kruger's desk and beckoned to Xxii and Amanda to join him. He pushed aside a ceiling tile and boosted Xxii up. The athletic young woman clambered nimbly through the opening. Seconds later, they heard a cry and a crash. I'm okay, came her muffled voice. Fell into a box of toilet paper. A sharp knock at the door cut off Bones' reply. Yes, can I help you? Kruger was pushing a bookcase against the door, and the strain was evident in his voice. FBI, open the door. Just a second, Kruger clambered up onto the desk. I'm looking at porn and need to put my pants back on. Excuse me, the voice said. It was all I could think of, Kruger whispered as Bones boosted him up. Perfect, Bones chuckled. Thunk. Something heavy hit the door. The men on the other side must have sensed Kruger was stalling. Thunk. The door held. Bones climbed up into the dark space above the drop ceiling, crawled forward and dropped down into the storage room where the others waited by the door. Where does the door lead? He asked Kruger. Back into the... Kruger's face went scarlet and he cleared his throat. Back into the museum. You've got to be freaking kidding me. Bones looked around the room for a weapon, anything that could get them out of this mess. His eyes took in the pile of boxes, the shelves lined with cleaning supplies, the dirty sink, the mops, brooms, and buckets. He smiled as an idea came to him. Everybody grab a cloth, wet it, and hold it over your face. Keep your eyes closed and wait by the door for me to tell you to run. While the others hurried to comply, he began gathering the materials he'd need. This had better work. He hastily plugged the sink and began pouring in bleach. When the big sink was half full, he opened several bottles of drain cleaner and added them to the mix. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. His years of diving, as well as his general level of fitness, meant he could hold his breath much longer than the average man, and he'd need every second. He closed his eyes and kept pouring. His sinuses burned and his skin began to tingle. On the other side of the wall, a loud crash told him the men had broken through. Up there, they went through the ceiling, someone shouted. Bones moved blindly toward the door, guided by the others' rasping coughs. His sharp ears picked out the sound of feet thumping atop Kruger's desk, a grunt as someone climbed up into the space above the ceiling, another set of feet on the desk. Go, he rasped. Hurry. Kruger pushed the door open, and they all burst out into the museum, knocking aside startled patrons. Back in the storage room, someone cried out in surprise. Bones grinned as the sound died in a choking cough. Gas leak. His raw throat gave the words a raspy tone, but he got them out. Everybody out, call the fire department. As was the case in any such situation, the people didn't react immediately. They moved out of the way of the fleeing group. That was fine with Bones. They'd get out of there in a hurry once they realized what was going on, and in the meantime they'd serve as an obstacle for their pursuers, who right now were probably finding it nearly impossible to see or breathe. As they burst out into fresh air and dashed for the car, his vision began to clear and his breathing eased. By the time they were headed out of town, the rearview mirror blessedly empty, he was feeling almost like himself again. What was that stuff? I look like I just smoked a bowl. Jessie pulled her eyelid back and leaned close to the mirror set in the visor. Chlorine gas. I went all World War II on them. You could have killed us, Amanda said. And what would they have done to us? Bones asked. Fair point. So what do we do next? We find a quiet place to lie low, while Kruger here tells us all he knows about the Book of Bones. Chapter 21. My God, will these flies give us a break? Amanda swatted in futility at the cloud of biting flies that swarmed around her head. They don't seem to be bothering you guys. She cast a baleful look at the others who stood nearby, suppressing grins. Kruger let out a puff of bluish smoke in her direction, temporarily scattering the insects. They don't seem to like cigarettes. Have one. He held out a battered pack of Marlboro Reds. I'll pass. Amanda waved the offer away, but moved closer to the others. So that's the final resting place of Billy the Kid? Bones nodded at the simple headstone at the end of the sidewalk. Enclosed in a black cage and set in front of a large cane cholla cactus, the roughly carved gravestone was the only feature in the enclosed space behind the old Fort Sumner Museum. Maybe. Kruger shrugged and led the way toward the grave. He's buried somewhere in here. Back then they used wooden grave markers and a storm washed them all away shortly after he was buried. This marker is just a guess. Bummer, Bones said. Why is it caged like that? Thieves and vandals. They reached the gravesite, and Kruger reached out to touch one of the bars. The headstone was stolen more than once. Why? Jessie asked. It's not valuable, is it? Who knows why? Same reason they have annual tombstone races here in town. Amanda cocked her head. Tombstone races? Is that what I think it is? Kruger chuckled. If you're picturing people running around with 80-pound slabs strapped to their backs, then yes. I can't explain it. Something about Billy the Kid brings out the crazy in people. It hasn't brought out too many crazies today. Bones' eye swept the empty horizon before returning to the gravestone. The marker memorialized not only Billy the Kid, but two others. At the top was inscribed the word Pals. On the left was the name Tom O'Folliard, at the bottom Charlie Boder, and at the right William Bonney. William H. Bonney, alias Billy the Kid, died July 18-something, Jessie read. Looks like the vandals damaged the stone. Kruger nodded. I have to say, I'm not too interested in sightseeing, Amanda said. I want to know who the hell just came after us and how did they find us. You know, we had to get off the beaten path, and this place is as good as any, Bones said. Kruger had chosen the place somewhat at random. It lay northeast of Roswell in the direction of the interstate highway that would take them back to Albuquerque or Quemadra, depending on what they decided. He let out a heavy sigh that made him feel like a deflating tire, turned and leaned against the metal cage. The sun had baked the bars, and he felt their warmth through his leather jacket. I have a theory about how they found us. It's not because you stand out in a crowd, Jessie said, because that wouldn't explain how quickly they were on to us. Bones shook his head. The incident at Alcone Rock has aliens written all over it. If someone suspects or knows that I've been checking into something related to aliens, where's the one place in New Mexico I'm bound to show up sooner or later? Kruger nodded thoughtfully. So they'd send someone to keep an eye on the place. That's how they got ahead of you. I guess Tam will have to change her identity again, Bones said. Sorry about that. Maybe not. They came looking for you, not for Craig Clemmer. I should be okay for the moment. So that's how they found us, Jessie said. Any idea who they are? I have an idea. Kruger flicked his cigarette butt out onto the dry brown dirt of the graveyard. Catching Amanda's disapproving glance, he hurried over, stubbed it out, and pocketed it. Anyway, I can't prove they exist, but I've long heard rumors of a group called STAR. Let me guess, Bones said. It stands for something ridiculous. Steering toward America's roots. That's bad, Amanda said. A simple acronym for simple minds, I suppose. If the rumors are true, they've got some bright and talented people among their ranks. Mostly ex-military, but they've got connections in other places as well, and the ranks are swelling. Sounds like the Dominion, Bones said. Kruger nodded. Somewhat, but their aims are not religious in nature. It's purely political. Limited government with the exception of the military. Limited taxes, again, except for defense spending. Basically, keep the border secure on the outside, laissez-faire on the inside. I can't say I totally hate that idea, Bones said. Then again, I've seen what powerful people inside the country are to get away with. I don't know about giving them freer reign." "But what do aliens have to do with that?" Amanda asked. "Aliens?" Kruger asked. "Nothing, but alien technology? That's a different story." He slapped a fly that had landed on his neck. "Time for another smoke. Anyway," he continued as he lit up, "I told you the group is filled with ex-military. At least some of them have to know about the government cover-ups and have heard the stories of highly advanced alien tech, if they could get their hands on it." "Rebellion," Jesse finished. "Overthrow of the government." "Perhaps," Kruger said, "but they'd settled for establishing their own small nation. Part of West Texas, southern New Mexico, which has a large population of expat Texans, pieces of Arizona and northern Mexico. They'd have oil and natural gas to export, and with sufficient alien tech, they could defend their borders." "Imagine the ripple effect that would have on the rest of the United States," Amanda said. "If a region managed to successfully break off from the rest of the country, that would embolden separatists all over to rebel. Even if they failed, it would be a bloodbath. How many innocent people would die? What would it do to our economy and our long-term stability?" Bones grimaced. Amanda's words echoed his own thoughts. Such an occurrence would send ripples not only across the nation, but around the world. That couldn't happen. "I think we all agree the Star Group sucks, but nothing you've told us has changed our goal. We need to get the Book of Bones before they do." Bones turned to Kruger. "We heard it disappeared around the time you worked at Los Alamos. Any idea where it is?" Kruger took a long drag of his cigarette and let the smoke out in a long, slow exhale. "Yes and no. I mean, I did steal it, after all." Chapter 22. Alcone Rock loomed in the distance, only a bump on the broad, empty horizon. Matthew grinned as it came into sight. Today was the day. The Jeep dropped hard into a rut as he guided it across the tough dirt road. Matthew winced, thinking of what he had stored in the back seat. It was a reflex born of irrational thought. It wasn't like he was hulling nitroglycerin. The road bent around a dense patch of pinon, pine, and juniper, and as he rounded it, he let his eyes and thoughts drift back to the rock and the mysterious door beneath it. So distracted was he that he almost did notice the olive-colored transport vehicle barring the way. "Damn!" He slammed on the brakes and the Jeep fishtailed as it skidded along the hard-packed dirt road. It came to rest in a dust cloud only feet from the side of the vehicle. "What the hell is—" The words died in his throat as two men clad in body armor and carrying automatic rifles approached his Jeep from either side. Matthew swallowed hard, took a deep breath, and rolled down the driver's side window. "What's going on here?" His voice sounded too high-pitched, almost shrill. He cleared his throat and continued. "I'm conducting research up on Alcone Rock." Sights closed. The speaker was a brick of a man, short and thick-bodied with a blocky build and flat-topped haircut. The bright New Mexico sun shone off his aviator sunglasses and gleamed on the sweaty bald patch of tanned flesh on the crown of his head. Matthew waited for the man to elaborate, but no further explanation was forthcoming. "I've been working here for months. I assure you it's all legal. The sheriff is aware of the situation." Situations changed. This time the man on the passenger side spoke. He was of late middle years, with silver at his temples and deep cracks marring his weathered coffee-and-cream complexion. Mischief danced in his whiskey-colored eyes as he worked at a toothpick in the corner of his mouth. Matthew wanted to step out of the Jeep and smack the toothpick down the man's throat, but he was outnumbered and outgunned. His eyes took in the scene. The men wore desert camouflage clothing free of patches, insignias, or other identifying marks. Their vehicle was equally void of identification. "Who are you guys? You're not feds." Matthew wasn't certain of that statement, but his gut told him it was true. "That's classified." Bald Spot cleared his throat and spat on the ground. "You need to get out of here, sir." "I have a right to be here." Matthew knew he was defeated. He supposed he could drive around the makeshift roadblock, but then what? They'd follow him and stop him climbing the rock. Hell, they might even shoot him. Toothpick Man rapped on the passenger window. "What?" Matthew snapped. The man pointed in the direction from which Matthew had come. "Is that supposed to mean something? Use your words," Matthew said. "Leave now, or we'll be forced to incarcerate you and impound your vehicle." Matthew knew there was nothing left to say. He shifted into reverse and hit the gas, engulfing the two men in a thick fog of dust. Neither of them flinched. He yanked the wheel hard to the left and hit the brakes. The Jeep skidded off the road and came to a halt. Matthew shifted into drive, floored it again, and tore away down the road. As he drove away, he gave the man the one-finger salute for good measure. Son of a... He pounded his fist on the dashboard. Who the hell were these guys, and how had they found out about Alcone Rock? Were they friends of his dad? Surely his father would have warned him of potential interference. That left Bonebrake. According to his father, the Cherokee's biography was as full of holes as Swiss cheese, but he had military and government connections. Matthew's thoughts raced. Bits and pieces of information sorted themselves and began to fall into some semblance of order. Sure, you just happened to break down at Cape Madra, he muttered. You went jogging and just happened to run straight to Alcone Rock, and you just happened to chat up my girlfriend. That sealed it. Bonebrake was behind this, and Matthew needed to find out exactly what the man knew, and Matthew knew where to start. The sound of a vehicle rumbling up her dirt driveway roused Mary from fitful sleep. She rolled over and looked at the clock on her bedside table. It was late morning. She hadn't intended to sleep in, but it was her day off, so why not? Squinting against the bright light, she turned to see who was coming. Her heart sank when she recognized Matthew's Jeep. He was the last person she wanted to see. She hastily threw back the covers and climbed out of bed. The tile floor felt cold under her bare feet, but the air inside her tiny bedroom was already warm and heading toward hot. She could open the windows and catch a breeze, but that would mean a house coated in dust before too long. She longed for an air-conditioned home, but she couldn't afford even a tiny window unit. She hurriedly tugged on a pair of sweatpants and a loose-fitting shirt and tousled her hair for good measure. Maybe if she convinced Matthew she was sick, he'd leave. Not for the first time, she chided herself for lacking the courage to end it with him. He just never took no for an answer. The solution was to get out of this place, but where could she go? She had no money, an incomplete education, and no job skills beyond waitressing. She was stuck. 3 sharp knocks and the front door squeaked open. Mary winced at the sound of heavy footfalls covering the few steps from the front door to her bedroom. She hopped back onto the bed, leaned back against the headboard, and closed her eyes. "Mary?" Matthew opened the door. "What's your problem?" "Migraine," she moaned. "It kept me up all night." Matthew snorted. "I'll bet you didn't have a migraine when you were talking to your new friend." Mary froze. She covered the reaction by slowly raising her hands to her head and massaging her temples. "What are you talking about?" "How much time have you spent in Bonebrake's hotel room?" "I went there to tell him to leave you." The words were out before she could stop them, and she hadn't finished her sentence when Matthew grabbed her by the wrists and hauled her to her feet. "I knew it! What did you tell him?" Matthew yanked her up so their noses were almost touching. Mary stood, trembling on her tiptoes. She could see every blemish in his scarlet face, feel his hot breath. She tried to push away, but he shook her with such force that a sharp pain shot up her neck. The meager resistance she'd mustered now melted away. She tried a softer approach. "Matthew, you can't think I like that man." "You admit to being in his hotel room?" "Only to tell him to stay away from Alcone Rock," she said in a rush. "What else did you tell him about the rock?" "Nothing at all, just to stay away." She gazed into his wide eyes, wondering what would happen next. Matthew's shoulders sagged, and he relaxed his grip on her. "I wish I could believe you." He turned, pushed the bedroom door closed, and turned back to face her. "But I need to make sure you're not lying."